Right. Good morning, everyone. I am Siobhan Martin, and I'm the chair of the PEB board, and I am convening the July 19th, 2022 PEB board meeting. And I am going to start it off with a roll call to see which board members are here. So I see Jeremy on screen. Morning, Jeremy.
Morning, everybody.
Andy, I see you on screen too. Good morning.
Good morning.
I see Greg Klauser here. Hello, Greg.
Good morning.
Got Sean.
Good morning.
Parkman. Morning. And let's see if we've got anyone else here. I know that Kimberly Hendricks is excused for vacation, right? She's out today, right, Ollie? Kate
true.
and Kate Nass is excused this morning. She's got conflicting meetings. Dawn Mottner. Dawn, are you here? I don't believe Dawn is here yet, so we can check again later. We have a new legislator appointed to our board, Representative Rob Nose. He is not able to join us today, and he will join us in future meetings. And our Senate appointment is still vacant, so I know that will be filled at some point. And I think our first order of business is the minutes. So we do have a quorum, and I will take a motion to approve the May 17th, 2022 minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great, thanks, Greg.
Right.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Andy. All right, let's take a vote on the minutes. Jeremy?
I vote yes.
And we've got Greg as the first, Andy as the second. Sean?
Yes.
All right, and I will also vote yes, since we need me for a quorum. Just double checking if Dawn has joined us. Yes, hello, good morning. We just voted on the minutes. Would you like to put in your vote for the minutes?
Vote to approve. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. All right, the minutes have passed. Thanks, everyone. So I think we're just going to move into our first agenda item, which is the Pmac Worksite Wellness Recommendations. And I've got several folks presenting. I don't know who's presenting first. I've got Brian Olson, Teresa Cross, and Stephen Noldner.
Hi, Siobhan, this is Teresa. I'm going to start us off and then turn it over to Dr. Noldner, and then Brian will go into his slides.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then Teresa, do we want to check with Rose in terms of controlling the presentation?
Yep.
Rose, are you comfortable? We're going to be switching between two different slide decks. Are you good with that? Or would you
Sure.
prefer that? Okay, awesome.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Rose. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, board. Teresa Cross, Peb Wellness Manager. And I am here today to share with you some recent efforts by the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council and to ask for your approval of some recommendations that they've been working on along with the PEB Member Advisory Committee. Also here today is Dr. Stephen Noldner from Mercer, who's going to go through some updates, implement and show you the implementation steps that we've taken on the well-being framework that you saw earlier this year or back in December. So please feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Noldner now to go through those slides with about the member well-being framework. And you're on mute, Dr. Noldner.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, you would think by now, after all the technology and all the time on Zoom. I apologize. So good morning, board members, and good morning, guests. Good to see you today, and thank you, Teresa and Brian, for having me be here with you to provide an update on the work that we've been doing together with your respective committees, PMAC and the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council on well-being strategy development in general. So we are here to give you an update on some of the things that we presented to you previously, and you can move forward, please, if you will. This is the high-level visual of the overall process that we've undertaken with the different groups. And you can see that our initial phase was discovery, and we have essentially completed that phase, and we're going to do some reporting out on that today. We're in the process of enhancing communications and promotion of those resources that we identified in that discovery phase. And you can see that we're ready to move into the strategy development phase. So we're making good progress, and we'll give you some update right now on what some of the specifics are. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So we identified these 3 collaborator groups, but there are other interested parties that we are working with and will be working with going forward. But at least initially, the Health Equity Work Group, the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council, and the Pmac are all key partners in this effort. And again, we've just gone through the discovery and promotion phase, and you can see we're using some color coding and symbol coding to identify in green those things that are complete, in red those things that are in progress, and then in another color of aqua, I'll call it our ongoing activities. So the Health Equity Group has been reviewing and will continue to review currently available programs and resources from the lens of the Health Equity Initiative. And they are also looking at the different vendors at the organizational level on their DEI strategies and initiatives. So are your carriers and vendors making strides toward being more inclusive and more representative of your DEI initiative? Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council, the things that they've are working on and have accomplished. An ongoing effort is diversifying their membership. And what they've completed recently is this inventory of existing workplace wellness policies and practices. And what's in progress is a review of the proposed programs, again, through that evidence-based lens that we'd like to use for all of your initiatives. And continuing to develop the promotion and communication campaign to push those out to individuals. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. The Pmac also is intending to diversify its membership and has also been involved in inventorying resources, and they're looking at it from a member-facing benefits perspective. And again, they too will be working on efforts to further promote and communicate the existing resources. And as I'll just make reference to the HEM program, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But as you know, they proposed to you and you approved a new iteration of the HEM model, and that will be integrated into this ongoing work around wellbeing strategy. You'll note that we also put it, even though we're not into the strategy development execution phases yet, we did note that we're continuing to apply that health equity screening tool and that perspective of health equity in everything that we do going forward. And we'll keep that perspective throughout the strategy process. Are there any comments or questions on what we've accomplished so far or what we're still working on? All right, we can move to the next slide, please. So here is a summary at a very high level of what we've discovered. So we invited and had multiple meetings with all of your carrier partners, including Canopy, your EAP partner. And you can see that we've highlighted some of the services that are in place right now and available to members. And I'm just going to refer to this now. I'll let you read the details and we'll share some observations on the next slide, but I'll pause here for just a moment, noting that overall you can see that there are quite a variety of resources available from your various carrier partners. And if anyone has any questions about those, I'm happy to entertain those as well.
Yeah, this is Brian. I think I received a comment from, I think, Alina at MODA mentioning that the behavioral health program, I think, is inadvertently listed under MODA because I'm not sure the board has actually approved that to move forward. So just a note.
Thank you, Brian.
And sorry, I didn't catch that before this, Stephen. My apologies.
Okay. All right, then let's move to the next slide where we'll talk about some of our observations having gone through this discovery process, as well as some recommendations on how we can better push out some of this information to interested parties. So again, as I just commented, there are really quite a large number of offerings and resources that are available to members from your medical carriers and the EAP. But what we saw from the reports from the various carriers and EAP, or at least the carriers, and EAP is a slightly different story, and I'll get to that in a moment. But from the carriers programs, while there were lots of opportunities there, we saw relatively low participation from in all the carrier programs. So that's a real opportunity. We'll talk more about what we can do to enhance that. The EAP utilization for the state of Oregon is above Canopy's book of business. However, it could be more highly utilized based upon the current needs around mental health, certainly since the start of COVID and ongoing. And I'll just note also that book of business is an average, as you can see. We tend to want organizations to report their 75th percentile book of business as opposed to average. I don't work with too many organizations that want to be average, so I presume you don't either. So we like to encourage the vendors to report on what could be maybe for now a stretch goal, but what is optimal and what are other organizations able to accomplish. So we'll continue to work with all the vendors on reporting out higher levels of utilization, or the highest levels of utilization they're seeing among their clients. We also.
Oh, Dr. Noldner, I just had a
Yes.
question. It's a broad statement that the resources being used by the medical carriers are low engagement. Were there any that stood out as higher engagement, or was it just across the board? Was it low for most all of them?
I would say it was pretty consistently lower than we would have wanted, given, I would say that we saw participation in the hundreds for most of the programs at the highest, when we should have seen thousands, maybe even higher than that. So I would say it was generally across the board where we saw participation was lower than expected.
Thank you.
Sure. And we also, as part of this discovery effort, we invited comments and feedback from people right at your front lines, people in your various agencies that were willing to speak. Some were members of Pmac, others were sharing their stories with Brian and Teresa, and they brought them to the discussion. And what you can see is some of the feedback was people were experiencing long wait times to see specialty providers. There was generally low concordance with providers. What we mean by concordance is there a close match? Excuse me, is there a close match for the individual with their provider in terms of cultural, ethnic, gender identity, other demographic factors that are important to the individual? There was generally low concordance, and that relates to your health equity initiative in general and the ongoing need for your partners to further enhance their capabilities in those areas. And then the other is lack of modalities for care. So, again, when people, especially people in more remote parts of your state, are at great distance from other providers, are there other modalities that they could engage with that would help them at least get more ready access? And we did see that the carriers are increasing their efforts to provide a more diverse or concordant provider panel, and there is ongoing training for cultural competency within their organizations. So I think everybody acknowledges that we're at the very early stages of this, and the awareness is there, but it's going to take time. One, we understand that a lot of the carriers don't even have the data, and they need to gather the data on what those various demographic and social and economic and cultural and identity factors are. So some of the recommendations I'm promoting for the carriers: consider one consolidated wellness platform that includes all well-being offerings with the ability to segment by the health plan enrollment and personalize the member experience. So we've talked about this before when we talked about HEM and earlier this year when we talked about this framework. But the idea is that with one centralized well-being platform, your organization, PEB, and the state of Oregon could have better control of where people are going, what they're seeing, what they're doing, and probably just as importantly, what the results are. everything would be funneled into one carrier for consolidated reporting, whereas now you've got multiple carriers with multiple programs from subcontractors, and it's a challenge to try to stitch that all together, if you will, in an aggregate format. So that's one opportunity we foresee. As well, through this process, we discovered that there are a number of programs that are out there that probably would be good elements of and good choices to be included in the HEM program for individuals to select. For example, some interactions with EAP for behavioral health, but also the other life services that they offer, and chronic care programs from the carriers. So I mentioned segmentation earlier, and maybe I'll just elaborate upon segmentation a bit from the perspective of a centralized wellness platform, but also from communication. From a centralized well-being platform perspective, segmentation, which essentially means using data from a variety of sources, could be from the eligibility file, could be from individuals' self-reported information, could be access to claims data, a variety of different factors. But in any case, the individual health plan association and health plan enrollment. So what segmentation means is that an individual is identified in their profile and their affinity for a variety of things. And in this case, in the health plan enrollment, they would only be served up things that are significant for them and are meaningful for them. So if they're in MODA's health plan, they would be referred only to MODA services. They wouldn't see Kaiser's and they wouldn't see Providence. So that's a way to enrich the experience and make the individual user feel like this is speaking to me and there's something in it for me. Same kind of concept of segmentation can be used for communication, identifying and then narrowing the target. So we talked about some examples, people in remote locations, people that have a certain gender identity or ethnic cultural identity. Those could actually be sent targeted messages or even sent to groups like ERGs and other groups that can help them have others with their same affinity or interests be involved in communicating with one another on a peer-to-peer basis, as well as directly through an external source. And as we suggested earlier, communicating through as many possible modalities that are available is really important as well, because everyone uses things differently and some want them on demand when I'm ready for it at 1 o'clock in the morning. Hopefully not too many in that boat, but some do. And others just prefer interacting with an app versus somebody on a telephone. So multiple modalities is really important. Another big opportunity that you probably know of and that we recognize and want to promote is Uplift Oregon. We know that they have 2 hours scheduled time with new hires. And it's a great opportunity for them to include all the well-being offerings and share with them all the resources that are available to them and get them involved in HEM right from the start. And you'll see the note that we did get some additional information from June Pmac meeting, and that really is incorporated in our observation and recommendations here as well. From an EAP perspective, we recommend that utilizing Canopy's HR materials. They already have a very rich supply of materials for HR leaders and other key partners that relate to critical incidents, how to identify people who might be struggling and refer them to the right kinds of resources. There's a toolkit that's available for these same kinds of key partners. And really the idea is that the resources there are really probably underutilized as well. And I think the other thing that we came away from this discussion with Canopy was that Canopy is very willing to have a presence on site to promote their services, to share their stories with their services, even outside of some of what's probably traditionally contained in the specified services that are included in whatever contract the agency has decided upon. They expressed a willingness to be available for more promotional activities, I think, across the board. So I think you should take advantage of that as much as you can.
And this is Brian. Just sorry, Stephen. I was just going to let the board know that this slide in particular is really setting the stage for the specific recommendations that you'll hear from Teresa and I later.
Thank you, Brian. So, and then that last piece, it relates to what we said just previously about Uplift Oregon being a great resource for that one-on-one interaction with new hires. They could also support the promotion of the EAP services. Any other thoughts or comments, Teresa or Brian, and anybody from the board? Overall, I thought it was a really valuable experience. We really had some really touching stories and some heart-wrenching stories from some of the membership that were sharing their challenges with workloads that didn't allow them to access the resources. Even being able to participate in a survey to ask them what their interests and needs were was a challenge. So it became very clear through this discovery process that there are many big opportunities for the state across your workforce, across the state in the various groups and agencies. I mean, from forestry workers who are out in the field and have to rely upon much less regular impact with computers and probably even smartphones to some degree, and your health agencies and your correctional facilities, a lot of different challenges for different work groups, and we need to find ways to help and support all of those. So we'll move to the next slide, please. And I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Aaron Ward, who has been working with the council and Pmac and OEB for that matter as well on promoting and communicating the resources. Aaron? And I just realized that Aaron wasn't able to join till 3 minutes from now. So I'm going to pick this up just to keep things flowing. She was tied up until 10 and I just looked at the clock. So as I said, Aaron has been intimately involved with Teresa and the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council for several years now. You can see in this initial step of the early promotion of existing resources, she is working with Teresa and the council to really define the vision of the council and where we want to go from an evidence-based perspective. And again, you can see that there's some completed activities in step 2. The Peb Wellness Month was sponsored in January of 2022 with a series of wellness webinars throughout January from the various Peb vendor partners. And the update there is it received really good feedback on it from the members on what they were able to gather from those interactions with the webinars. As well, the council is sponsoring a wellness section of the Peb newsletter, and there will be ongoing newsletters slated for each month with a section on wellness and webinars that are available in that month. And this month, July, is when the format is going to be updated and will further call out the wellness resources. In process is development of the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council's branding so that there will be a logo and or a tagline that will be attached to communications that relate to well-being and wellness so that people will immediately know this is related to this group and this initiative. In step 3, in process is the development of wellness guide to summarize the wellness plans and programs that are available to all Peb members. And again, this is an outgrowth of that discovery process that we just described. Ongoing, we'll be refreshing the wellness page on the Peb website. And the update on that is the digital focus groups have already been completed, and their recommendations will be included in the update of the site. Then there will be a relaunch of the wellness page at some future point in time as well. And then step 4, distribution monthly of Did You Know emails, series from the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council. These are short focused emails on a single wellness topic, and it's really intended to drive members to view the wellness webpage and the content that's on that. And again, this is going to be part of the revamped Peb newsletter starting this month. Teresa, do you have anything to add to those comments and those updates?
No, I don't. Thank you, Stephen.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you
Yes.
track how many people open those emails?
Yes.
And what's the
Yes.
percentage?
And I'm hoping that my colleague, Erin, is joining right now at 10 o'clock because she's the one who is tracking those stats. I don't have
Perfect.
immediate knowledge. But maybe we can come back. I'll go another slide or two, and by that time, Erin should be on, and we can ask her that question. Fair
Oh,
enough?
that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move to the next slide, please. So this is, again, a visual depiction of the overall timeline and the different work streams that we've talked about. Discovery has been completed. Promotion and communication of those resources is going to be ongoing continuously. And now we're about to move into strategy development. And as a matter of fact, Teresa, Brian, and I have a meeting this afternoon to talk about putting that into action and how we will move that forward in the timing of that. Then once we get through the development of the strategy, we clearly want to be socializing that with various groups, and we'll obviously be making a presentation to the board for their approval, and then we'll move into executing on that. So again, you can see that we didn't put specific months in the timeline because it's a bit amorphous with summer months and other things that interrupt the flow, but we are making good progress, as you can see, and we intend to continue that, and we'll have a plan to keep on moving throughout the end of the summer and into the fall with the strategy development.
And I would personally like to thank Mercer just for supporting Teresa's work and my committee work. I think one of the biggest benefits of this work is Mercer helping us bring these work streams together and doing it again underneath the broader framework of health equity, so that we can be a little more strategic. And it's been a huge help. So thank you, Stephen, Erin, and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate that comment. It's our pleasure. This is what we do. And to have an organization like yours and partners like Brian and Teresa and the council and the Pmac and the other groups that we've been working with, they really have a passion for well-being. And it's not just check the box. We know that it's meaningful to you, the board of directors, and your state from your governor's mandate, if you will. Couldn't be more exciting for someone who spends their life doing this. So thank you. Erin, have you joined the call? There's a long list of people, so I just want to check to see if you've been able to join.
Yes, I just joined. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to a question that one of the board members asked about, and the first question was, do you track the clicks and the click-throughs on website? And I think you do. I said yes, so correct me if I'm wrong. And the follow-up question was, do you have those stats available to have some sense of what percentages those might be?
So that is something that we have asked PEB for to be able to provide. However, it's a little bit more complicated because the web pages are part of the broader state site. It's hard to it's been hard to get kind of focused, narrowed results. So it is something that we're trying to get, but we have not been successful in being able to really see a report on that yet. But certainly if we ever are able to see it, we would share that information.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, thank you. I stepped out there boldly and said yes.
No,
so.
no, it is something, on any website you should be able to track the results, but because this is part of such a larger site, that's where the complication rises.
So I guess we can chalk that up as another opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In
Yep.
the big, and certainly using the state's resources and pulling from that. But the other thing I'll just mention, and this goes to one of our recommendations for consolidating into one platform your well-being offerings. That is another great way. We see vendors being able to look at the impact on uptake on activities that are on the well-being platform compared to various communication campaigns. So we literally see vendors being able to track spikes in participation based upon different communication efforts. So that's another opportunity that could be more in the control of the third party and or you if you engage that third party. All right, next slide, please. I think we are just about at the end of this phase. Yes, we are. Just wanted to point out where we plan to go next. I've alluded to the fact that we're ready to go into strategy. So we will be identifying and assembling key partners to contribute to this strategy effort. We'll confirm the governance structure. So who is going to be responsible and accountable for the execution of the wellbeing strategy. Within the development of the strategy, we'll define the vision statement and the guiding principles, and then develop a multi-year strategy, a framework that will also move us to developing the specific tactics that will be necessary to achieve those broader strategic goals. And through this whole process, we will be identifying what we call business requirements for your wellbeing vendors. So these are the characteristics, the capabilities of the carriers and the vendors that will be needed to execute on that strategy. And these could also serve as part of the RFP process for determining who are your best candidates for a wellbeing hub vendor, as well as any other more targeted niche solutions that might be accompanying those, like diabetes prevention and musculoskeletal, those kinds of other services that you might want to plug into the hub vendor. So that's where we plan to go next. Next slide, please. And after we complete that strategy development process, we will present to the board again, have a discussion and get your guidance, and then move on to executing. So we intend, as you can see, to begin this next phase of strategy development in the end of this month, next month, end of summer, beginning of fall is probably a more realistic time frame right now as we're initiating the next step. So open to any questions that you might have. There's more material in your document here in the appendix. You've seen that previously, so we just are giving you the high level updates here today, but you have the other materials in the appendix for your reference. If not, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Oh, I think I'm going back to Teresa. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Neldner.
I was going to say thank you, Dr. Neldner, and now I'll turn it over to Teresa.
Rose, if you could proceed to the next slide, please. I think.
Are you going back to your first slide, Joe?
Yes, yeah, you're on the right show, and then the next slide within that.
Okay.
So based on the carrier and the Canopy EAP presentations that the council and Pmac heard, several themes emerged, and those led the council to develop and approve some recommendations that we forwarded to you. Before I go into those, I just wanted to give you a little background on who the council is. The council is a structure that was put in place by the Executive Order on State Agency Employee Wellness in 2017. The EO also prescribes the composition and the size. Currently, there are representatives from 9 agencies and 3 bargaining units that make up the council. Their tasks are laid out in the executive order, providing guidance to agencies, PEB, and the governor's office, developing and implementing a communications plan, and reviewing 2-year agency wellness plans. And the recommendations that you'll hear about today are examples of their charge of providing guidance to PEB, as you see laid out there in that first bullet under tasks. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? You've heard from Mercer about the member well-being framework. And as you know, the board directed Pmac to work on a long-term vision for the health engagement model, and Pmac presented the board with that vision last year. Because Brian and I both staff one of the advisory groups for PEB, we each do, last year he and I began to work more closely together to align and coordinate our respective groups' work. And when Mercer brought forward the well-being framework for the council to consider, Brian and I realized that it perfectly captured a model for coordinating our respective advisory groups and outlining where they might work collaboratively and to avoid duplication between the two groups. So as you recall in Dr. Neldner's presentation, the council and Pmac heard presentations from each carrier and the EAP on what members were coming to seek services for and what programs members were engaging with during the pandemic. And those were laid out in the planning phase of the framework. And once we heard from our advisory members that one thing we heard from our advisory groups was that they liked the well-being framework and planning was great, but members needed help now. So that led us to identify some actions that our groups could immediately take to address those needs, especially around mental and emotional health. And we separated these actions into two areas based on the work group, on the work that each group is tasked with. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what we heard from Canopy. These are the top issues that members called and presented with in 2020, 2021, and so far this year. You can see that anxiety and COVID concerns were right there at the top, along with family or marriage and relationships, family and depression. The council also heard from Pmac and their constituents and members of the employee resource groups, very similar concerns from their constituents. Canopy also reported that they were receiving requests from agencies to provide services that were outside of the contract that PEB holds with Canopy. So we saw opportunities there too. Next slide, please.
And just a note, a reminder for the board, PEB holds the master contract with Canopy, and under that contract, agencies decide whether they can participate or not. It's not like our core benefits where there's no choice. They actually can choose PEB's EAP benefits or purchase EAP benefits on their own. If they go through PEB, our contract is set up to provide two different service level models. One is based on a 3-visit per event model, and the other is a 5-visit per event model. So those are the choices that participating agencies are currently limited to. In addition to that, there are a number of banked or total hours available for stuff like critical incident stress debriefing that is provided under the contract, but it's rationed. It's only so many hours. So once they're gone, they're gone. So anytime an agency needs stuff that is outside of what we provide, they're kind of left following, like we do in other areas, contract and procurement rules. And as Teresa will get into with her recommendation, contract and procurement rules oftentimes take a while. It takes time to go through all the steps to pursue a contract. So anyways, just to let you guys know how currently the EAP benefits are set up and some of the related issues. Sorry, Teresa.
No, thanks, Brian. That's important. Another piece of information to further bolster what we learned from Canopy and what we heard from our advisory committees and members is from the HERO Scorecard. In May of this year, the PEB board heard a presentation by Dr. Neldner, Kaiser Permanente, and me on PEB's HERO Scorecard results. A new feature of the scorecard are subscales for 3 areas: mental health, social determinants of health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mercer provided PEB with their subscore in the mental health section, which revealed that among the 6 scorecard categories, PEB scored very low in the organizational and cultural support category with only 8 out of 35 total points. This subscore, along with the other information that we collected, is going to lead the council to offer recommendations to the board on how we can better support our members' mental health. The next slide, please.
I just had a question on the previous slide. If you can just share a little bit more what you mean by, well, what is meant in the survey, organizational and cultural support around mental health.
Do you want to move back to that previous slide, Rose, real quick? And I'm wondering if Dr. Neldner is still on the call, because this is their specialty, and I think this might be better answered by him.
Yes, happy to do that. Yes, as a matter of fact, we're Mercer and Hero are collaborating on the sub-score development right now. And so organization, I'll speak broadly first of all. Organization and cultural support. Well, let me just step one step further back. The way we're able to derive these individual sub-scores is from the total question set from the Hero scorecard. So what we've done with subject matter experts is go into the scorecards, the full set of 62 or 63 questions, and identify those questions and responses that relate specifically to mental health, social determinants of health, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we then are assigning scores and weights to the different responses to come up with these sub-scores. These relate to the broad categories, the 6 domains that are contained in the overall scorecard. An organization and cultural support, you may recall this from one of my previous presentations. We published a study a year or so ago from a factor analysis that we did on the Hero scorecard. And that was an attempt to identify which best practices were most associated with the outcomes of health improvement, healthcare cost reduction, participation, and employees' perception that the organization cared about their health and well-being. Of all the factors, the organization and cultural support were the most important. And now to get specifically to your question, what does that mean? What we are seeing is that organizational support consists of policies as well as practices. It consists of leadership support as well as frontline support from supervisors and managers. It refers to providing the resources that are necessary to support individuals in their various needs, and is their execution on those effective or not? So it's a combination of a variety of those factors that are aggregated to come up with the individual score for any of one of these subscales, in particular mental health. Did that answer your question?
It does. Thanks for the refresher on that.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Neldner. Rose, could you proceed to the next slide? Thank you. So the council unanimously approved these 2 recommendations for the board to consider today. Number 1, that staff would initiate a contract renewal with Canopy that would be effective next July, that could potentially result in additional service levels or restructuring of existing service levels to be more robust, as well as to add hours available to agencies for things such as critical incident stress debriefings. And this is a little bit more about what Brian was explaining about the PEB's overall contract with Canopy. And the second recommendation is that PEB staff work with the Department of Justice to explore whether a DOJ-approved contract template can be produced specifically for agencies to purchase their own EAP services that are not included in PEB's price agreement. So, Brian, I can't remember if we wanted to ask the board to approve these as we go along, or have them look at Pmac's recommendations and approve them all together.
Yeah, I think we can leave it up to the board. Any specific preferences? Do you want us to continue going through, or would you like to take action now?
I think it makes sense for us to see if folks have questions about the recommendation, since we just heard the information, and look at it now, and then move to the next set of recommendations. That would be my preference. Are folks on the board open to doing that?
That would be fun.
Okay, and I see a head nod from Andy, Don, Sean. Okay, so on the first recommendation around initiating the contract renewal with Canopy, are there questions around that? Discussion or a motion?
Oh, I'm just curious what the cost is.
So that would be part of the renewal process. What we're recommending is that we initiate just what you guys completed with the other benefit carriers, but we started now with Cascade or with Canopy, excuse me. So I think if you were to approve this, the next set of information you would see is some of Cascade's proposals for different service levels, as well as what the costs associated with those service levels would be.
Thanks, Brian. Any other questions or comments?
So I know I'm new. This is Greg. And I know that last meeting we approved all the 23 if this becomes effective 23. And we do get these services that are supposedly coming online and that cost does change. That would or would it potentially affect the cost overall for 23? I know it's probably minute, but just a question.
You're on mute, Brian.
Ollie, are you able to speak to where in the budget this would hit? I will say right now the two service levels are somewhere just barely over, I think, $1 per member per month. So it is a really small slice of the overall spend.
I kind of figured that. I just didn't, I didn't know. I figured it wouldn't come in, tons more, but just something that if it comes in and it's a bit more, just something that we would know where that money's coming from and where it's going as well. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, we can report that out. As Brian said, it's a little over $1 per employee. I would just also add, over the past couple of years, we've obviously had our share of crises, and Canopy has always risen to the challenge that actually different agencies have really brought to the table some enormous challenges, and figured out ways how we can support that. I think for the cost, the services that are delivered to our members is really at a critical juncture, and EAP is such a big part of that. So,
And believe me, Ollie, I'm not saying no. I just know we
I
approved.
know. Yeah.
And like I said, being new, I know we've already approved that, and if there was a difference coming in, just how we would attack that is all. I'm not.
And not.
We need that more than anything.
Yeah.
And not to put Mercer on the spot, but I would imagine, and correct us if I'm wrong, Mercer, that part of this renewal process would be the different proposed service levels, the cost, and if there's, an impact to the overall budget. So I think I would envision that being part of the renewal process and discussion going forward. But Mercer, is there something about the EAP services where that doesn't make sense?
No, Brian, that's the process that we would use, is identifying what the different opportunities are, pricing those out, projecting the impact on overall cost.
Perfect. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment, just following up on what Ali was saying, and I think you were nodding your head around, Greg, was around the crises that we've seen and how Canopy has really shown up to support PEB members in those times. And what I was hearing you say, Brian, is that when we run out of those dollars for that, it takes time to procure more hours in order to support our members. We don't have them up front.
Yeah, for an agency that participates under our contract, if they want something over and above, and that's completely valid, they have to go through the whole contract and procurement process, and as we know, that can take time. So we're trying to head that off and trying to take care of those needs up front. So if they do have needs outside of the menu that PEB provides, we try to take care of the legal parts up front. Because these are EAP services. I mean, more often than not, there's not the time to wait to negotiate a contract and get that in place.
Not to be a downer, but I'm sad to say that these services need to be used by staff, but sometimes they aren't. And last month we did lose an officer over in the Salem area to suicide. So I just really appreciate everything that our insurance does and we put out there for them. And the more we can get them to them, the better, we are. So believe me, I never once I say no to any kind of service to help our individuals. any of our state level jobs.
I have
Yeah,
another,
there's-
again, after grade, like, again, being new, is the Canopy, the critical incident stress debriefings, is this our like #1 way to deal with crises? And that's okay. I mean, that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, and if Canopy's on the phone, they may want to weigh in on that. I think the CISD, the critical incident stress debriefings, I think are the main go-to when you have like a worksite issue. I think individually members are reaching out to EAP directly for their own for their own issues and events as well. But if there's anyone attending the meeting from Canopy that wants to weigh in, you're more than welcome to jump in. Not hearing any. Okay.
So any further discussion, or do I have a motion on the recommendation?
I can make a motion that we adopt as presented.
Thank you, Greg. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Andy. All right. So I know Jeremy had to step out to a meeting. I don't think he's back, but I'll double check Jeremy. Right. I don't think Jeremy's here. Greg was our first. Andy was our second. Dawn?
Approve.
Thank you. Sean?
Approve.
Thank you. And I will vote yes as well so that we have quorum. All right, the motion passes. And there's a second recommendation that we're being asked to look at, which was to work with DOJ to explore whether we should have a contract template. It sounds like that would make it easier to purchase additional services from Canopy outside of PEB's price agreement. Is that right, Brian? To
That's
streamline
correct.
that process.
Yes.
For agencies, yeah. So that way their contract staff aren't left kind of in an impossible situation trying to get a contract in place when services are needed, yesterday.
It helps them be more nimble so they can act quickly when they've got an incident, for example.
And this was included as a recommendation specifically to you all because it will take staff resources. We'll need to work with DOJ to create a template that can be legally approved ahead of time.
So any questions around this recommendation, or do I have a motion?
I have a question. What's the
Go
order
ahead.
of magnitude of the cost for recommendation 2? How much is the order of magnitude anyway?
Honestly, I would need to probably go to the drawing board and kind of provide some rough estimates on staff time and calculate the cost. There's certainly a staff cost to PEB, and we'll pay for DOJ. However, I think it would only probably take a couple of agencies needing this to save the state costs overall by eliminating the need to have multiple contracts drafted from the ground level up and all of them potentially going through DOJ or other reviews. So I'm sorry, that's kind of a non-answer. I can certainly bring back a staff estimate of some sort if you're interested.
No, that was a good business case. I agree with you, and I support. I'd like to. What do I need to do? Move to accept.
You'd like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to accept recommendation 2 as written.
Thanks, Dawn. Do I have a second?
I can second, Craig.
Okay, thanks, Greg. All right, so I don't believe Jeremy is back. Andy, how do you vote?
I approve.
Thank you. Sean?
Approve.
Thank you. And we've got Dawn as our first, Greg is our second, and I will vote to approve as well. The motion passes. Thank you all. And I think I'm giving it back to you, Teresa and Brian.
Thank you, board. And I think Brian's up next.
Thank you, Teresa. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Pmac recommendations. Just a brief background because we've already covered most of the background information, but as a refresher for the newer board members, Pmac is our Joint Labor Management Committee, and they provide advice to you and staff on a number of areas, but historically mostly focusing on open enrollment communications, the health engagement model program, et cetera. They were created through the collective bargaining process as well. Next slide. So we're going to jump right into the recommendations. And again, one of the reasons why we don't need additional background information too is because this is something that is not new to the board. And so feel free to jump in if you do have questions. So recommendation one, based on the presentations that Pmac heard, the recommendation is that engagement with Canopy, our EAP vendor, should count as 2 health actions under the health engagement model. Some of the details underlying this recommendation are included under the other considerations bullets. So they also recommend that the communication materials we'd send to members about this should define engagement and provide meaningful examples. So engagement would be defined, loosely as an interaction a member has with Canopy, either with a live person or just through actively learning. They could be even just researching information about the services they offer on Canopy's website. And then also, Pmac mentioned that we should continue to emphasize that member privacy concerns. In other words, PEBB still does not audit or review what health actions members are taking. And so we will not be privy to what they do to meet the program requirements. And given that we're recommending EAP engagement as 2 health actions, it makes sense to emphasize that we are not privy to those conversations they have with EAP, nor do we need to be. Next slide, please.
And Brian, even though we aren't privy to those conversations, we do get the aggregate numbers of how many people are engaging in Canopy, right? So that if this did become a recommendation, we might see an increase.
Correct. And in speaking with Canopy previously, they were of the opinion that in the previous years when we've held out EAP engagement or related items as applicable requirements under HEM, that they've received a little bit of a bump. And so again, that's the intent here is let's see if, holding engagement as 2 health actions will get more members even to learn about EAP services. And on top of that, engage once they do learn about what's available. In the communications, Pmac also thought it was important to give examples of the different types of engagement. So one type is registering for the Whole Life Directions program that they provide. Another is learning about services available for behavioral health issues that a member or a member's family member is dealing with. But also emphasizing that it also includes learning about all these other services that could be really beneficial to members and their families, such as assistance for first-time home buyers or assistance for members with various elder or child care issues. So I will stop there. This is the first of 2 recommendations. Any questions so far?
Shall we go ahead and consider this recommendation and go back to the previous slide so folks can see it again? And there would be no cost associated with this. I just want to say that, but I can double check that, Brian.
Correct. I mean, to the extent we're increasing, if it results in increased utilization to EAP of services that are already covered, there wouldn't be an increased cost. Again, if this were to spur more agency requests of things outside of our contract, there might be additional costs that they bear. But again, part of our previous recommendation is to try to make sure that that's not an onerous process when they do have additional identified needs.
And it's also about shifting culture, which is hard to quantify, right? But folks engaging in more health actions.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, it's, hey, EAP provides a lot. Just go out and find out what they do. Find out what may or may not work for you and your family, and that satisfies your health actions under HEM. And the hope is continuing to try to promote that sort of exposure to Canopy and the services they provide would hopefully increase needed utilization.
So do we have any questions or comments from board members or a motion on the recommendation?
I'll make a motion that we accept recommendation 1 as written.
Thanks, Andy. Do I have a second?
I can.
Greg, you're our second. Thank you. All right. Sean, how do you vote?
Approved.
Okay. Dawn?
I'd like to express my appreciation for the outcome of interest here, which is improved health and wellness and improved engagement with a service that we're providing that is currently underutilized, and approve as written.
Thank you, Dawn. And we've got Andy as our first, Greg as our second. I also vote to approve. So this motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, on the next slide, we have the second recommendation. And let me just note that this isn't something that necessarily would typically go to you all as a recommendation, but again, since it will require some staff effort and resources and it's related to what we're talking about, it felt appropriate to take before you guys today. So the second recommendation is for us, the board and staff, to share Canopy's various promotional material with key partners and member groups as appropriate for that particular audience. The promotional EAP information that I mentioned includes various member-facing promotional materials that explain the benefits that Canopy provides, as well as an HR toolkit that is more directed for HR managers and staff. Key partners and member groups could include, ERGs, other employee groups or committees, HR staff, or just any other groups that help onboard new employees or otherwise involved in explaining employee benefits to new employees. So for example, we continue to work with Uprise, and this is an area that we'll continue to discuss with them in terms of how we can promote EAP information not only to members, but to the HR folks that they may interact with. So let me stop there and open it up for additional questions.
And you said Uprise. Is that Uplift or?
Uplift, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something else that I wasn't tracking. Okay. Are there questions for Brian on this recommendation or comments?
Yeah, so this related to this recommendation and then also the general discussion we've been having about wellness initiatives. I think it would be helpful in implementing this for the board to have some kind of overview. I don't know when, 6 months in, like a year later, really detailing out which HR departments have been responsive and which ones have not. And I would like to see those in order for us to be able to discuss strategies for those agencies that are just like not responding. So
And
I don't
are
think
you
that
saying
has-
that in general, Sean, or specifically about when we're sharing promotional material?
Both.
Perfect.
So in our timeline earlier, there's this general concept of like outreach to agencies and HR departments, and part of it is us pushing out materials. The other half of it is that HR departments of various agencies actually act on them. So we know that we've had over the years have had very heavy variation among HR departments in taking us up on sort of assisting our various communication efforts related to programs that we're trying to promote that we offer. So that's all I'm saying. Like, I don't think that alters the recommendation. I'm just putting a note in that as a follow-up to the board as we implement this kind of thing. It would be nice to know which HR departments are not responsive.
Okay.
I just wanted to second that, and I think would be helpful as part of that analysis to see how that correlates with the uptake in the benefits. And if we can be sure to include the universities in that analysis as well. I guess with the exception of OSU, which does not use Canopy, but that's the only exception is my understanding.
So I think what Teresa and I could do is work with Mercer and the team to see if we can come up with any simple measures or metrics that would speak to agency engagement. You know, have they developed their wellness plan? Have they kept it updated? And if we figure out some sort of milestones for this related work or some sort of engagement, you know, we could just have a handful of maybe measures initially just to kind of assess how the agencies are engaging and go from there.
I imagine that Canopy probably tracks how many materials are going to what agency, their requests and so forth, but we can include them to get this information as well.
Okay. And then just maybe a quick additional feedback is, would the board, I assume, want staff to prioritize agencies initially by size? You know, who's going to get the most reach? Knowing that there's well over 100 agencies, and we'll have to have some sort of priority kind of in that work. Does that sound about right to folks?
That sounds right to me. Or if other folks have comments.
Okay.
And do we have a motion to pass or just a motion for recommendation 2?
I have one more question about that last proposition about the order of operations for which agencies to reach out to, and if there's a way to center equity more effectively than the largest agency first. I don't have a proposition there. It just occurred to me.
Yeah, we can explore various ways to prioritize kind of the work. And so we could just explore, brainstorm, and if we need to, maybe bring some ideas back to board leadership for some kind of reaction and additional discussion.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Do I have a motion around recommendation 2?
I can make a motion.
Thank you, Greg. So Greg has made a motion. Is it to pass? Is that your recommendation? I didn't hear you.
Sorry, yes, make a motion to accept it.
Great. Thank you. Do we have a second?
Mr. Sean, I'll second.
Thanks, Sean. All right. Andy, how do you vote?
I approve.
Thank you. Dawn?
Approve.
Thank you. And I will also approve. And we had Greg as the first, Sean is the second. Motion passes. Thank you all. And thank you, Teresa and Brian. I don't know if you have any final comments.
No, thank you for the decisions. Thanks again for Mercer, again, helping Teresa, myself, and the rest of the team kind of bring this stuff together. And we look forward to bringing back some more updates to you later this year.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for your work.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to all 3 of you for presenting today. And so our agenda actually shows us moving right into the next presentation, but I'm going to call a break right now. And we're going to go ahead and take a 12-minute break. So that will bring us to 10:55. So if everyone can return at 10:55, we will move into the utilization report at that time. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to resume the meeting, and I believe we have Emery Chen from Mercer to share the utilization dashboard with us. Emery?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm here to present the utilization dashboard for the PEB data. And what you can see here on the screen is the agenda for today. We're going to start by essentially talking about the aggregate cost. So starting with an overall picture, and then we start breaking into the trend components, risk efficiency, and then diving in a little bit more into the clinical conditions and categories of service. So if we can move on actually to the next slide. Thank you. So slide 4 here shows the data and assumptions, just to kind of orient you to the time period we're talking about. We are looking at calendar years. The data provided from the data warehouse is actually what we like to do is we like to look at on an incurred basis. And so by doing so, we have to wait a little bit longer to make sure we have relatively complete claims, and in this case for calendar year 21 that we do have that, and then that's going to be the current period. The year prior, 1 year prior, is going to be calendar year 2020, and this you'll see, that is relatively heavily impacted by COVID, and then 2 years prior, 2019, and then that's what I think a lot of people might consider the last, I guess, normal healthcare year recently. We'll see what happens for 22, but costs, as you'll see for 2019, were higher than where they currently have been over the last 2 years. For the plans that are included, we do have self-insured, the statewide plan, as well as the Providence Choice and MODA plans. And then we have the fully insured Kaiser HMO and Kaiser deductible claims. It is on incurred basis, and a few caveats there, just in particular for the Kaiser. They do have a fee called the integrated care fees, and some of the reporting does include that in some areas in terms of the total cost and efficiency. In other areas, those fees are not actually included as quote unquote claims. So, but in terms of the overall total cost, Kaiser reporting does include about $23.9 million in integrated care fees for the current period, and about $20 million for the year prior and the 2 years prior. And these are fees that kind of are based on the per member basis or on medical claims for non-claim services in terms of care management, coordinating care and other things like that. Any questions before we move on? Okay. So moving to the aggregate costs on slide 6. We show self-insured on this first slide, and then fully insured is going to be on the next slide, and then we'll have a total PEB on the final slide in this section. Well, actually, on the third slide in this section. But the total annual cost here on self-insured, it moves from 2 years prior to 1 year prior, and then the current's on the right-hand side. And we do this show the percentage change between the current and the 1 year prior, as well as the 1 year prior and the 2 year prior on this page. So at the very top, those are the aggregate costs for medical and prescription drugs. They do both include rebates. So any rebates that are provided to PEB are used as an offset for this case. We do not show admin fees in this section. Admin fees might be included on a few other slides later on, but not on this slide. But in terms of the overall aggregate medical costs, the current time period you can see on the far right was about $571 million. And for prescription drugs, that's about $115 million for a total of about $686 million in total self-insured claims. The percentage change over the prior year is an increase. For medicals, 4.1%, and for prescription drugs, it's 7.8%. So overall, it's about 4.7%. That is, as you know, above the 3.4% limitation. The one, just to keep in mind, if you take a look at the columns to the left, or I guess in the middle percentage change, you can see the change from 1 year prior, which is 2020 to 2019. Due to COVID, there was actually a pretty big drop, 7.3%. So the 4.7% is in many ways a return to services. There's also some savings from additional clarification of Senate Bill 1067 that's built in, and we'll also talk a little bit more later. But the return of services accounts for a lot of this increase for the current time period. On the per employee per year basis, which is in that middle section, the increase is still about 4.7% as the total annual membership for number of employees at the very bottom, as you can see for employees, didn't really change. It was 0.0 from current to 1 year prior. For the members, there's actually slightly fewer members during the current time period, 0.4%. So there wasn't much change in membership for the self-insured plan. So the cost per employee, essentially, you can see the percentages remain the same between the current and the total. But yes, that is a 4.7% increase on a per employee basis. Last year, it was a 8.1% drop. So you can see compared 21 versus 2019 on the far left, costs have gone down for PEB. Any questions before we move to the fully insured slide? Okay, next slide. So same information, except this time for the fully insured plans. And in this case, fully insured just refers to the Kaiser HMO and Kaiser deductible plans. The change in total cost is much bigger in this case. So for the current medical, the costs, they're about 135 million, which is about 21.6% increase over the prior year. The prior year, you can see it's a pretty big drop in the medical, 12.5%, but the overall total cost for Kaiser did increase compared to 2 years ago. For the pharmacy, the costs did increase again in total in the aggregate, 5.8% for the current time period, 7.7% for the prior. And so when you blend the two, the cost percentage increase is 19%. And in terms of the total dollars, it's $157 million compared to 132. So that's a very big increase, but one thing, the membership also did increase. So if you take a look at the very bottom, the membership increased 5.4% on a member basis. It's 3.5%. So, but there were shifting in 21 to the Kaiser plans in this case. And as a result, the per employee per year cost increases aren't as big as the aggregate. So on the medical is 15.3% and the pharmacy is 0.4%, which is a blended 12.9%. The thing to keep in mind is, you know, if you compare that to what the change last year, those changes last year, the percentage decrease in the medical was bigger, 15.8%, and the total was a decrease of 13.2%. So when you compare the costs between current and 2 years prior, pre-COVID, the costs are actually lower. So they are slightly below where they are 2 years ago. So, you know, the increase in the most current year does, you know, if you take a look at it on its face, it looks a little shocking in terms of the percentages, but really it's a return of services in this case. And we'll talk a little bit more. I think there's a lot of behavioral health utilization that increased for Kaiser as well, which you know, in many ways is good utilization and ended up returning here. Ali, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Emery. Yeah, just wanted to make a comment. So this is really the downside of having our 3.4% test in legislation, because when you have circumstances like we experienced in 2020, where costs are, there's a huge reduction in costs, it really resets the baseline down much lower than, you know, what it normally would be. So obviously a 3.4% increase off of the previous year is still lower than 2019, as Emery said, but obviously is not going to meet that test of actual costs. So we have, just a reminder, two tests in our statutes. One's a premium increase of 3.4%, and the other is actual costs under 3.4%. So we'll need to discuss that more throughout the year as we get updated reports, but that's it.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna appreciate the reminder on that, and I know Greg has a question.
Yeah.
And I think another thing we need to remember too is, as Ali said, is 3.4 is also across the board. So if we lost 5% from our statewide plan, we put those 5% into Kaiser, that would also drop that plan, which as a whole that 3.4 may be closer met than looking at these numbers, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, and Kaiser is fully insured, so what you see here aren't actually reflective, directly correlated to the premiums. There was for the 2020 premiums, those were calculated pre-COVID, so no one anticipated a drop. 2021, we were anticipating a return to services, and I think Kaiser's increases, I believe, have been about 3.4%. So actual costs out have met the requirement, but when we take a look at the underlying claims, there has been the return, and so the changes are much bigger in this case. Good. Next slide. So this is a total cost. So this is, I guess, a little bit more, I guess, on point for the whole 3.4% and PEB's cost. When we take a look at the total aggregate cost, the change there is 7.1%, 7.0 for medical and 7.5 for prescription drugs after rebates. And so the total claims for medical is about $843 million. So that, again, 7.1% increase. The prior year had a 7.7% decrease. So the total cost actually was a drop over the 2 years from 2019 to 2021. Membership did increase over the last year a little bit, 1%. And so when we do that, take a look at that on a per employee per year basis, the overall increase was 6.0%, 5.9 for medical and 6.4 for prescription drugs. And that 15,626 per employee per year, again, comparing to 2 years prior, was 16,207. So there actually still is about 3% decrease compared to 2 years prior. Yeah, so a 2-year test would help mitigate that 3.4% to show that you're well below. But with the 1-year look, it unfortunately does put you above that 3.4. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. This is something we've shown in the past, but I don't think we've shown in a while. It's kind of a longer term look, and it still ties into that 3.4%, over where PEB has been limited to that for a long time. And this shows the different plans and their per employee per month medical and prescription drug costs from 2017 through, actually, some of this is actually through March of 2022. So there's a little bit more updated information in this case. And what you can see for choice for medical, which is in that top line on the left, the blue, lighter blue is the per month incurred claims. And then the purple is essentially, well, if we applied a regression to the trend rate over that time period, what would it be? What would be like kind of a smoothed out trend rate increase? The costing percentages increases are shown in the table. So for Providence Choice, that purple line represents a 0.9% increase in costs over the last 5+ years. The bottom line is prescription drugs, and these are prior to rebates, but that underlying cost is increasing 11.6%. Rebates they have been increasing over the time period. So if you do add in rebates, it reduces that cost increase by about 2 to 3%. So realistically, the medical costs for the cost overall annual increase for RX, after rebates is closer to 8.5%. But the underlying unit cost does increase by 11 to 12% for a choice. And that does include, service mix, and these are unadjusted for plan design changes in that case. But as new specialty drugs come in, those would impact the prescription drug line. And if you take a look to the right, the statewide, actually over the last 5+ years has essentially dropped just a slight bit, 0.4%. I think some of that has to do with risk There's some plan design changes that have been made for statewide, but risk has also kind of switched out a little bit. I think choice has kind of grown in terms of the risk, and that kind of impacts their cost a little bit. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on open enrollment changes in later slides. And then prescription drug, the cost increases on average about 8.5%. And then again, if you take out the impact of rebates, that's closer to 6% annual cost increase.
And Emery, I know you said you'll get into this later in the slide deck. I'm just curious because we see this increase in risk scores for Providence Choice and thinking about what's driving that because it is a more managed plan. So I would think that with the fees that we have in place and the contractual agreements we have in place, that should help manage the risk so that the population would be healthier.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're gonna, if we can get more into what's happening there.
Yeah. So over time, I think the risk scores for choice. I mean, I guess what you want to do is you want to take a look at the risk of certain members and who have been in the plan for a while, and the risk scores for them as they increase. Some of it's going to be increasing due to age naturally, but you'd like to see maybe a lower increase than what an age increase would be. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but we can definitely do that as a follow-up in terms of the longer time period members and their risk. I mean, we did pull some of that information. I just haven't summarized it for you right now.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for us to look at that for the future because it's also about, what we're paying for in these plans and what's happening so that we can get those details.
Yep.
Thanks.
And some of the later slides, I mean, we talk about efficiency, and so that's essentially how well the plans are managing the use of the use of medical costs to manage the members' health. Choice is more efficient than statewide, so any switching does end up reducing costs. Any switching to the coordinated care model plans does reduce costs in that case. And so even though you might see the choice members, there's some risk shifting between statewide and choice, people who do switch end up, their costs end up being better managed and thus better for PEB, I guess, in terms of limitation. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. So we show, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
If you could go back one slide, please. As we talk about managing costs, do we see any differences in health outcomes as they relate to costs for any of the plans?
I think that's a really good question that we're going to have to get back to you on. There are performance guarantees, there are the metrics. I think we can try to parse out health outcomes, and I'd love to talk to you about what you might want to see in terms of those metrics. And yeah, that's definitely a place where we can go. Ali, did you have something you want?
Yeah, I would just say we actually have a meeting set up with Providence on Thursday, and that's a perfect question and discussion for that meeting. If you have the opportunity to attend that, that's something that they would love to talk with you at length about.
I'll be away on Thursday, but would be happy to take you up on that conversation at another time.
Yeah, we can follow up for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on to the next slide? Okay. So slide 10 shows similar information for Kaiser and MODA. So for Kaiser on the left-hand side, you can see the medical claims actually dropping quite a bit over the last 5 years in this case. And Kaiser is through end of 2021 in this case. You can see how the blue line kind of drops due to COVID pretty significantly, and it's a little bit longer or a bigger drop over a few months. And then now it's like returning and bumping back up. So that's part of the reason why you see the Kaiser costs, increasing on the percentage basis between 20 and 21 quite a bit, because there was looks like a bigger drop for due to COVID. But overall, over the last 5 years, it's dropped about 2.4%. And that does include some shifting between Kaiser deductible and the Kaiser HMO. So that's part of the reason for the decrease, but overall, Kaiser does decrease by 2.4%. And for pharmacy, their cost increases 2.0%. Rebates are not part of their model. So the 2.0 is the pharmacy cost increase in this case. For MODA on the right-hand side, the cost increases over the last 5 years for medical has been pretty flat, 0.2%. And the prescription drug cost increases prior to rebates is about 6.5%. Rebates reduce that trend by about 3%, so 3.5% or so for the prescription drugs net of rebates over that 5-year time period. We'll note on the risk scores for Kaiser, the risk scores increased 1.8% over this time period, and MODA is about 1.6. So, so the overall increases in risk scores is a little bit higher for choice over the time period. Kaiser and MODA are about pretty similar, and you do have migration out of the statewide. So the statewide risk is getting better, or hasn't been increasing as much as the other plans.
I just want to recognize the difference in performance in prescription drug cost management. Just knowing that there's a lot of pressure on prescription drug prices. That's an impressive outcome over that time period for Kaiser.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Their prescription drug costs have been very, very steady and very low over a long time period. Any other questions? Okay. So moving on. Components of trend. These you see some pretty big swings in the trend components here, and COVID-19 has a big deal to do with it. I think we talked about the increases. So the blue is the current year, the green is the prior year. So you can see that blue at the very top, the total annual increase is 6.5%. And then last year, with COVID, it was actually 8% drop. And so, return to services is happening. You can see that in the next line below, the utilization, where the blue is 9.5%, almost perfectly offsetting last year's decrease of 9.4%. Then one interesting thing, I think, is really the unit cost there below. So there's a few things going on in that third row, where the current year actually has a decrease in the unit cost. Part of it has to do with service mix. Once we start taking a look at it, the vaccines, while there's a lot of people using vaccines, the administrative cost is pretty low for that, and those do count as like a service in terms of office visit or in terms of a pharmacy brand drug, and so those do impact the unit cost impacts there. But another thing is the clarification on the Senate Bill 1067 rules about the lower of rules in terms of the contracted or billed amounts. And that did have a pretty big impact on the maternity cost and the inpatient cost. So a lot of that unit cost decreases due to that. There's some, I guess, good news on specialty facility and professional drugs, where some biosimilars came in, and so drugs prices went down for specialty in some cases in a pretty big way. And also there's some shifting between inpatient utilization and outpatient. Inpatient, there's unfortunately a lot more COVID cases that cropped up, but those costs weren't as high as maybe some of the other inpatient facility costs. So that's impacting some of the unit cost there. And also, there are, facilities, hospitals have had lots of pressures, issues with staying open during COVID, with their not their members, but their employees, right? They're facing staffing shortages and stuff like that. And so there's been a lot of shift between inpatient and outpatient in this case, or maybe underutilization of inpatient services that we'll need to monitor in the future. But that's impacting some of the unit cost there.
And Emery,
yes.
Just the comment on the maternity care. Maternity care ended up getting inflated when 1067 passed, and then that had to get corrected.
Yes.
So it's a result of the correction of that, right? Yes. And that was something that, I know Peb did an audit and so did OEB, and had to go through that process, but those costs should have never been as high as they were in that previous year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the savings from the bill weren't as high during 2020 as they probably should have been. For 21, they did come back to where we were projecting. So you did get some of those, get the cost back down to where we were originally projecting in this case, or would have been under the bill. Yeah, the member risk you can see there did change a bit between prior year and current year. The 5.8% does get impacted by utilization. So as people didn't go in, they may not have had the diagnosis for that condition that they might have had. And so the health risk, that 5.8 is not necessarily a true risk decrease. It's just really more of a, what did they go see the doctors for? And then for 3.9, that may be inflated because people did go back and have those diagnoses in this case. And Don, you had the question?
Thanks, Emery. The shifting around of utilization is of great interest to me, and I would like to go into more detail on those things. I don't know if the whole board is interested in where utilization, also known as accessing care, has dropped and where it has increased, and at what times in the pandemic, right? Because there was full shutdown in March 2020 when nobody could get anything. And then there was a rise in hospitalizations, especially with Delta, and then that fell off, but then the backlog of surgeries and so on. So from a health care utilization, access, and population health management array of perspectives, there is a story there for how our members' health and the system issues, including the workforce shortages that you talked about, including, people delivering babies in hospitals with 0 visitors, no second parent of baby, no doula, nobody at the bedside. They chose to go to home-based, like there were a million shifts in there. And that story is of great interest to me for our members as well as for our communities at large. And at whatever level you and your team have done those analyses and been able to track those trends and what they match, I am deeply interested in that for our members. And I don't know if this is the environment for that, if everybody on the board is interested in that conversation, or if that's something that we could or should take offline.
Well, it's definitely something we can look into, and we, in terms of the information, and so we can definitely get that. Try digging further. Yeah, in terms, you have some really good thoughts, questions that we can maybe talk and develop a plan offline. I mean, some of this may be great for PEB board, some of this may be in the IWG type of format, and we can look at overall PEB and OEB in terms of shifting and stuff like that.
What is IWG, sorry?
Innovation Work Group. So it's like a combination PEB and OEB where we kind of dive into more total utilization, total cost, questions that impact both, right? So healthcare delivery in Oregon, I think that'd be a great, more data oriented look.
Thank you.
I also just want to comment that I think an analysis like that would inform us of where we need to think about care needs to happen, right? Where was care missed as part of that story, and where we need to have more communication with folks so that they're getting the care they need. So I would think at some level it would also come here. Maybe the deeper dive in data is with the innovation work group, but I would think we would want that information as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So the final line there, cost share and leveraging, that's really the percentage of the overall healthcare dollar, that's being picked up by PEB due to essentially services going up more than the cost sharing measures are. So, the deductibles are fixed generally, unless you make plan design changes, but healthcare has inflation. So as a result, since the deductible's fixed, PEB ends up picking up a little bit more of that overall dollar, and the member's cost stays the same, but any additional dollar then kind of gets leveraged onto the PEB plan. So the impact for 21 was 1% compared to 0.6% for the prior year. So that is part of the overall cost, and kind of something to keep in mind. With 3.4%, if the deductibles and out-of-pocket limits kind of remain and co-pays remain static, there is going to be a little additional pressure on that 3.4% because they are remaining static versus the overall inflation rate. Moving on to the next slide. A little bit deeper breakout by the components by the different service category. And there are a lot of moving things moving around here, a lot of big bars on this slide. So on the far left, that's inpatient. So a couple of big things that you can see there. The cost share leveragings on the far left, and those, I guess, across the board are 0.3 to 1.9%. So you can see the impact by the different service categories there. But overall, for inpatient, there was a decrease of 12.3%. 5.2 of it was due to utilization. So shifting of services or just inability to get inpatient services. The pressures on the facilities is probably part of that 5.2%. There was definitely a shift in some ways to outpatient services, in this case, outpatient surgeries on a few things. But the unit cost, you can see, has a pretty big drop. I think it's like about 18.9% or something in that ballpark. That's a mix of the maternity cost as well as the types of services that were rendered in inpatient. Fewer higher cost inpatient admits, a lot more COVID admits, again, unfortunately. And those COVID admits are about $30-something thousand. So that's not really a huge per admit cost. And so that does bring down the overall average, or what's shown in terms of that unit cost. For the outpatient, another big drop in unit cost. There's some savings due to specialty, where the unit cost for some specialty happens there, some shifting mixes there, but the utilization went way up. So additional utilization in terms of people going in and having some of those preference sensitive services, or just wanting to use services again in this case. Let me see if I have any other notes on that. Yeah, nope. So on the physician, you can see the overall cost increase is 10.5%. A lot of it's utilization. The unit cost did drop by 7.4%, but that's really due to COVID administration. So a lot of people went in to the doctor's office to get a COVID vaccine, and the cost of that administration of that vaccine is like $40. And so the number of those visits basically brought down the unit cost. Without COVID, it would have been a small increase in terms of the unit cost, like 1% to 2%. So that decrease in physicians really due to a service mix. Then for prescription drugs, it's a little bit more consistent, 7.9%, 3% in utilization, unit cost and risk make up the rest of it. And then the all other, which is lab and radiology, lab went way up because COVID tests happened. Radiology had returns of services, so a lot more MRIs or X-rays and other things going on there, which impacted the all other cost. Okay. Any questions? All right, next slide. Some additional breakouts on the trend components by service category, and this is by plan, so you can see some of the biggest movers up and down. So for Providence, prescription specialty drugs had the biggest increase, $8.88 per member per month, which is about 17% increase over the prior year for that category. The outpatient surgery, you can see there to the right, had a increase due to additional services, and then the inpatient maternity had to decrease due to the contracting changes in this case. Statewide, their largest increase is outpatient surgery, bigger, $10.83 and 22.2% increase. Prescription drug specialty did have a pretty big increase, and you can see this inpatient surgical cost went way down. So some of it's the shifting of services, and some's like underutilization or less utilization in this case for statewide. For MODA, prescription specialty drugs was the biggest increase, 18.8%. Similar drops, I guess, similar story. Inpatient surgical decreased, inpatient maternity decreased due to lower costs. So that's good there. And then Kaiser deductible, Kaiser HMO, biggest increases were for mental health outpatient, and you can see some pretty big increases there. A lot has to do with additional utilization. There was some additional cost and service mix, a little bit higher intensity outpatient visits, like longer visits that impacted as well. But big increases, 46% and 35% for just that service category. And then non-specialty office visits, that's like includes telehealth there, and then inpatient medical drop for Kaiser deductible and specialty drugs drop for Kaiser HMO. So I think a pretty similar story across the board for each of those plans. Moving on to the next slide. Some pharmacy information here. So the total drug per member per year increased 4.1%. As you can see, the biggest driver there on the left-hand side, specialty drugs, which is the third row, increased 11.2%. Unfortunately, it continues to increase. But some good news on the specialty drug in terms of in the professional setting or in the outpatient facility setting. So those costs actually did decrease. There were some trend drivers listed down below in terms of the services. One correction on the Daralex, the J code actually got mistyped, and it was an increase of 1.2 million. So low correction. So that was a bigger increase, and that's you had more members using that, and it's a pretty costly drug. But Remicade decreased, the hemophilia drugs decreased in this specialty setting. There's a few other drugs that and essentially had biosimilars or generics. And so those were much lower cost and the uptake was a lot more. And so that reduced the specialty drug for professional and outpatient facility. But in terms of specialty PBM, there were increases. Stelara had an increase in this case. And then non-specialty drugs, the biggest increases, I mean, you can see the COVID vaccines there. So that's only 2 of the vaccines. There were other additional vaccines that were administered, but it's the biggest driver of the costs in terms of non-specialty.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not sure whether this is built in anywhere, but obviously, perhaps not obviously to everyone, that $2 million that we spent there on those vaccines really likely prevented a lot of COVID hospitalizations. Is there any way that gets built into the model somewhere?
It is not. I think in the past we provided information or the plans actually, I think, provide information maybe on admits and the vaccination status of those.
Yeah.
We could, yeah. Go ahead.
Ollie, you're probably about to say about the same thing I'm about to say. You say it.
Yeah, I was going to say the plans have data around that, and we actually have them coming to report to the board, I believe, in August or September. I'll have to look at the work plan, but they'll have a comprehensive kind of COVID landscape. You know, as we get more and more data in, you know, and trying to flesh through, you know, what's real and what's, you know, a result of something else happening related to COVID. I think it's going to give us the kind of information that the board wants to make decisions about the future. And I think member health risk and how that's been impacted by teleworking is one that I'm really interested in seeing, especially as we talk about wellness programs and long-term strategy there. But yeah, Sean, I mean, we saw some information with Providence Tuesday and just talking with Kaiser recently as well. They have information showing that unvaccinated members were far costlier in long-term hospital stays. So go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I got a preview of that yesterday. The difference is dramatic. The cost between vaccinated folks and those that are not. It is not a confusing analysis. Like, it is very, very clear. So yeah, I think that would be worth having that breakdown for all the carriers, just to see it. It's pretty clear and dramatic.
I can think of some venues where that kind of information might be useful beyond this one. Thank you.
And Don, you put a comment in the chat. We also, in our conversations with the carriers, heard about backlogs in procedures. So that's definitely something that is worrisome for the next report, which is, I think, in December. So yeah, that's noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
So,
yes,
Emery, can you help me? Maybe this isn't the time. I know that every year we have a session that's kind of pharmacy specific, and that's always exciting and bleak that particular day. But in this one, I guess what I'm really trying to parse out, and it's totally fine if we're just doing it later. But I guess the question is, for me, is the breakdown of the cost increases per year. And I really liked the conversation that you were hinting at earlier, where we were looking at like kind of a 5-year trend, because I think you really lose the forest for the trees when you're looking at it just like 1 year over the other, because you really need to look at it over, you know, a 5-year trend. So when you're looking at that, the 5-year trend, what I would be really interested in is the amount or the percent, or however you want to put it, of the increase is related to new exotic specialty drugs, right? Or like the new things coming onto the market that are addressing conditions that have not been addressed well with older medications. In other words, there's a new drug that's for a disease that really doesn't have anything for it, right? That, which we know is happening, versus cost increases for things that really shouldn't have cost increases. In other words, cost increases for like insulin, where like we have known how to make insulin for 100 years, and somehow the price keeps going up. And like other drugs that are marginally better than drugs that have been around for like 50 years, but somehow they're like 60 times as expensive. That trend. And it's like those are two very different cost driving mechanisms, like brand new drugs that are addressing a disease for the first time, life-changing kind of drugs versus basically like, can we make this more expensive? Like that's our innovation. And so it's like which of those, how much of each of those kinds of cost drivers are contributing to our trend, because the one side our plans probably can't do as much about, right? Because it's a new drug for a disease that doesn't have anything. So of course. But the other side, you can do a lot about that, based on formularies and so on. So I'd like to see that analysis of like how much is impacting our bottom line in those different types of cost increases.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we can try to take a look into that. I think October's typically, I think, when we talk about pharmacy.
That
So
sounds right.
yeah, so we'll definitely talk about it internally and see what
Okay,
kind of
sounds
information we can provide for them. But to your point, yeah, I think there were some generic drug cost increases showing up, and unfortunately, in one case, it was insulin prices went up quite a bit, and that impacted it. And it's just like, yeah, I mean, insulin's been around for a long time. It's increasing by like 15-20%. It's like,
right.
Why?
And it's a little fuzzy. Like I recognize the difficulty of that analysis, because sometimes the trick is like it's not technically generic. It's just a drug that they like slightly tweak the formula, so now it's a new drug, but it's really an old drug. And like how do you measure that, versus just completely novel drugs. So anyway, that's just part of the little nuance there of like what is generic anyway, and things that really should be generic, but they're technically not because of bad actors essentially. But anyway, yeah, I look forward to that later.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Comments? Okay. So moving on to the next slide. So we're going to go through risk and efficiency in this section. So this is a slide that I think many of you have seen before. It talks about the risk scores and the change between prior and current. So you can see it for the different plans. So the two Kaiser plans are on the left, MODA, Providence Choice, and statewide, and then total PEB. I think mentioned before the prior time period, those may be kind of deflated a bit due to people not utilizing services for conditions they actually did have. They just didn't go into the office and have those services, or just didn't go as many times. So those may not be truly reflective. So this 4% increase, or 3.9, I think said on the prior slide, that may not be truly reflective of the real risk increase between the years. But generally, I think you can see it's increasing pretty much across all plans. Kaiser HMO kind of did have a decrease in this case, but Kaiser Deductible had a similar increase of about 4% in that ballpark. So most plans did see that relative cost increase, or risk increase in this case. So moving on to the next slide. This slide shows open enrollment results in terms of members that were in December 21, and then where they went to in 22. So number of members are at the top, and the average risk of those members is down at the bottom. So taking a look at the various columns, so December 21's on the left-hand side, and you can see it by the different plans. So Kaiser Deductible had 4,000 members, and then statewide down at the bottom had 45,000 members. Of those members, the number that remained in the plan is in the second column. So Kaiser Deductible had 3,678 to remain in the plan of the 4,100. Statewide saw a decent size, I guess, drop in those who decide to remain in the plan, 41,825 versus the 44,900, so about 3,000 decreased. The risk of those members can be seen in the table below, so it's directly between those two. So you can see the risk of the members in December 21 on the left, both 0.7 for Kaiser deductible, and then down at the bottom, statewide is 1.06, and you can see the other plans. Moda's a little bit more risk, has a little bit higher risk, and then Kaiser HMO and Providence Choice. Those who remained in the plan as of December 21, and so some of the people who may have left, some people have left, but those who remained in the plan essentially stayed about the same risk. So there wasn't really, you know, a lot of risk shifting between December and those who decided to leave the plan. Statewide and Providence Choice had a slight increase. But taking a look at the third column, those who switched into those plans. And you can see the enrollment up at the top. More people switched into the MODA plans. Providence Choice and Statewide had similar, well, had lower switching in. So did Kaiser deductible HMO. But the risk of those who switched into the plans were lower cost. So MODA actually saw a pretty big, I guess, decrease due to those who are switching into the plans. The risk of those people, 0.82, so they got a little bit better membership due to open enrollment. Statewide Providence Choice, it helped their risk scores, but nowhere near where MODA did. And Kaiser HMO, you can see, also had a pretty low risk that shifted into the plan. Ali, you had the question?
Oh, I was just wondering, Emery, if you could just talk for a second about what risk represents, that age, gender, and thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So risk of the plan, what we do is we take a look at overall claims of a member. So if you go into the doctor for asthma or just a general preventive visit, or even if you don't go into to see the doctor, those claims are essentially analyzed and regressed based on formulas to a cost, like a health services cost. So like the relative cost of how much you would be your per member per year cost should be based on the type of services and diagnoses you have for that year. So what this risk score does is it represents the cost of relative cost of a member. We do normalize it. We make it to a 1.0 for PEB. So when you see above 1, they're more expensive than the average PEB member. If they're below 1, they're less expensive. And so that relativity can show you essentially the cost impact on the plans in terms of, okay, you know, if statewide's 1.06, we expect them to be about 6% more expensive just due to the risk of the member. MODA's 2% more expensive, and then Kaiser deductible will be about 30% lower cost because of the type of risk of the member. So that's what we're trying to show here, is really the risk and the impact on the cost due to open enrollment for each of these plans.
And Emery, that the column on folks who left a plan, does that include people who left PEB overall, or is it just people who migrated to other plans? Okay. So my question would be is there a way to just pull out those who left a particular plan? Because those who left in general, they're not going to show up in the risk scores at all anymore because they're just gone.
Yes.
Isn't it? I just wonder if for our purposes, it's more helpful just to see those who left the plan that migrated. Maybe it should be like migrated to a new plan versus people who left entirely.
Yeah, we can definitely show that. We do have that breakout. I just didn't show it in here. That we can definitely add that for next time. Yep. So,
but you you largely get risk scores based on costs, right? Like, I mean, it's like age, you know, some demographic stuff, but you don't right away have an indication like a new employee. You don't know if that employee has diabetes until they go to a provider and then they get diagnosed or re-diagnosed with diabetes, and now you know. So like new employees, you find out like the next year.
Yes.
That's how it works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's generally how it works. I mean, based on age, we can try to come up with a proxy, but it doesn't really, I mean, the actual risk, the actual conditions that they have, you don't have it. So it's not going to be nearly as accurate. So, and also, yeah, we don't have the claims for that. So in terms of new to PEB, we just put it as NA in terms of the risk here. We'll find out later this year. But yes, in terms of the left to plan, those are people who may have retired or left PEB entirely. And you can see the impact there. I think, again, MODA had a lot of people who left MODA who were more costly. So, overall, MODA's risk on the far right-hand column between December 21 and January 22 is about 3% better. It drops from 1.02 to 0.99, even before maybe newer, healthier people came into PEB. So we would expect MODA to have a pretty good increase or a pretty low increase in 22 as a result, because they are getting an advantage based on the risk of the members there. For Providence Choice and statewide, the risk is slightly more expensive, 0.97 points for Providence Choice previously to 0.98, and statewide down at the bottoms 1.06 to 1.07. Kaiser deductible, Kaiser HMO, their risk basically stayed the same in this case. So a little preview of where we expect maybe claims to be. Hopefully directionally it holds true as the claims come in for 22. Okay. The next slide takes it one step further. This shows the normalized risk cost by plan. So what we do is we take a look at the claims, administrative fees, and that includes just regular administrative fees, plus in the case of Kaiser includes the other fees, the integrated care fees. And we also do offset for rebates, medical and pharmacy rebates. And what we do is we take a look at the total cost. For the claims, we normalize it based on the risk scores. So try to take out the relative risk of the plan from this comparison, and then add in the administrative fees and any of those rebates. And that total cost kind of shows you, kind of gives you a proxy for how efficient, how well a plan is managing the members to PEB. So in this case, you can see the lowest bar is MODA, and that's 505 in terms of dotted purple line after risk adjustment. So sorry, the purple line's the risk adjusted, the bars are the unadjusted. So the purple line's really the normalized cost. So MODA's at $505, so they're the lowest cost. Providence Choice is $528, and Kaiser HMO's $588. You can see statewide of $544 per member. One interesting note about this, we've been showing this for a while, and so I did a comparison to pre-Senate Bill 1067, and the differences between the plans were actually bigger in 2019. So as the Senate Bill 1067 came in, and as people were capped at the 200% of or facilities were capped at 200% of Medicare in some of the more populous areas, that has essentially brought the plans closer together in efficiency. So looked like there was maybe a little bit more contracting differences prior Senate Bill 1067 that are kind of getting mitigated out as a result of the bill. So that I thought that was a little bit interesting in this case. And I guess, as we see, the locations of where people are, that will make a difference. There's still some contracting issues, I think we'll see on the next slide. Depending on the region that you're in, that can impact the plan's cost and efficiency. But will be interesting to see if that Senate Bill 1067, if the results in future years kind of stays similarly, because some of the maybe differences due to contracting is not really part of this efficiency anymore. Okay. Next slide. And this is a slide we've shown in the past and wanted to re-up it based on the updated Senate bill results. We did take a look at 2020 and 2021. We excluded Kaiser because they're kind of their pricing is different, and they're kind of restricted in the location. So we wanted to take a more of a look across the state and the relative cost So this is based on MODA and the 2 Providence plants. So this shows you the relative cost of each county compared to PEB on total. And green is better and red is worse. So you can see, the darker red, 15% more expensive than the average PEB member, mostly on the east side, 5 to 15% on the east side of Oregon as well. And then there's a few locations, Curry County, Wasco, and Clatsop, that are more expensive. And then you can see for the 5 to 15, Columbia, Clark, and Lincoln are kind of little pockets. And then Gilliam, Grant, Harney, Lake, and Klamath, the eastern side is more expensive in this case. So there is a very big regional difference in terms of costs. The rural areas, their costs are much more expensive. As the bullet point says, it's 26% more costly than PEB average. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much more expensive it is to get healthcare on the east side. And these are risk normalized. So we're trying to get at the true kind of underlying cost or efficiency of the providers.
And Emery, has there been any changes? Because we have seen these slides before, and my recollection, I could be wrong, I thought that Jackson had also been high in the past. So,
Yes.
is there any changes that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think Jackson and Douglas have improved a little bit. I want to say in the metro area, I mean, like the Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, Tri-County, that those counties were essentially right on the 5% border cusp. I think most of them were like about 4 or 3% difference. Or actually, maybe it's just a little bit less than that, but those may have been just a little bit cheaper in the prior ones. So the relative cost did increase a little bit. I don't know if it's part of it is, the Deschutes County, I don't think it was green before. Now it is green. Bend, St. Charles Bend is a capped facility. And so that may have had some savings impact as well, and to bring down the overall cost in that county.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is when we look at who the 1067 impacted, which hospital systems, right? It was different. I mean, it depended on the size and whether they're critical access hospitals or. Yep. And anyway, but like doing the analysis in terms of like the types of hospitals and the trends we're seeing and how it impacted the hospitals in those areas, and to point to, is there something that we need to do in the future moving forward legislatively around some of these other systems that continue to drive costs?
The healthcare. I mean, healthcare in the eastern side. I mean, you do have quite a few people in Umatilla and stuff. In terms of contracting or just better management of the health. I think that's been a consistent story. But in terms of the 1067, we can take a look a little bit more at that. It may have flattened out some of those, in the Multnomah, Clackamas, Marion, Lynn, Lane. I think those have been, they're pretty close in terms of relative cost. And so the Senate bill may have had a pretty good impact in terms of just kind of evening the the normalized cost of those members.
Thanks.
But yeah, we can definitely dive a little bit more into it and provide a few more breakouts and historical looks. Okay. Moving on. So slide 22 shows some information about clinical conditions. We do have a table with patients and people who had services with those different conditions on the left, and then some relative costs there on the right. So we can go through that. But in terms of the conditions and services, so starting out with the mental health. Mental health services have increased quite a bit. If you take a look at the patients per thousand, and then that column to the right, which talks about the change between 2019 and 2021, the mental health number of patients in terms of people who had that condition and got treatment for it. Bipolar and depression, they increased, but just very slightly. The biggest increase is really in anxiety. And you can see it increased from 2019 to 2020 during COVID, and then further increased in 21 as more people got treatment for it. So anxiety increased 13.4% in terms of prevalence in PEB. The cost for those members is over to the right, and the dark blue is 2019, the far left is 2021. So more people have been diagnosed with anxiety or gotten treatment for anxiety. The cost per member actually has gone down a little bit. It may be more people are being treated. They're kind of starting their treatment pattern and just haven't had as many services. So the overall cost per member is a little bit lower than where it was pre-pandemic. But you can see in 2020, the utilization went up and costs went up. And so people, who had anxiety may have gone and had more services during the COVID time period as they were locked down. The second section, cardiovascular, there's a little, I don't know if it's something to keep in mind or to watch. So there is a decrease in the people who were diagnosed with had hypertension claims. That dropped 4%. You can see the drop from 2019 to 2020 from 49.2 to 46.8, and it stayed relatively low in 21. So that may be an area to focus on in terms of people maybe not getting the preventive and getting diagnosed with it. I don't think stress levels have gone down since 2019. So hypertension should, monitor that. Coronary artery and chronic heart failure, small increases. Chronic heart failure, small population, so the 5% increase may be just randomness, but it's, it is an increase, so something to keep in mind with the wellness programs. The next section, I guess, I want to look more into this, the respiratory conditions, those people who are getting services for that, asthma and COPD, those went way down in 2021. So that's something we're going to dive into, and I don't know if there's something we can look into, talk to the plans about as to whether what the issues are with that and what can be done to make sure that we're not missing people in this case. So endocrine weight is down below. So diabetes has increased a bit, kind of remained the same in 2020 versus 2019, but increased in a bit for 2021. But that's one of your things you're definitely working on. So just keep addressing that issue. Obesity, treatment for obesity also went up. Treatment went down in 2020. That may be to people just not getting care, but obesity levels are up in 2021. COVID, weight gain, another area to look into wellness and just trying to make sure, the condition is being addressed in this case. Musculoskeletal down below, working on the COE program, but interesting how the prevalence has dropped, maybe just due to COVID and people not going in saying, I can deal with it for now, but it decreases 8.4% and 5% for osteoarthritis and low back disorder, respectively. And then other conditions, those with HIV and rheumatoid arthritis, those a little bit of an increase for HIV, but rheumatoid arthritis is a slight decrease in this case. In terms of costs for depression on that right-hand side, the cost for depression actually has gone down. So I'm not sure if people are using fewer services in this case for depression. I'm not sure. It's just a little interesting that those have gone down considering the number of behavioral health visits that have gone up. Diabetes costs increasing quite a bit. You can see the lighter shading, which is prescription drug portion of the cost, is increasing. The medical portions dropped a bit, but the cost of treating diabetes with the prescription drugs, insulin, and other things has gone up. So that's, I don't know what we can do about that, but it's something to potentially address.
So, Emery, this is a really useful slide. So a couple things here just to note, not to sort out today, but for a long time now, we've been saying that before the pandemic, that we wanted to increase our members accessing mental health and behavioral health services, because we knew that they were being underutilized and there was a lot of undiagnosed mental health conditions out there. Then there was a pandemic, which I don't think it's controversial to say increased the need and increased the amount of depression, anxiety, etc., or just worsened them anyway. So I think it's normal for us to expect, we have been expecting, that there would be an increase in, I mean, we were trying to be deliberately increasing the amount of people accessing behavioral health. Usually we're trying to get people to decrease, but in this case, we want it to be increased. So now we have got that. And we're probably even missing still yet more people, although I think there was some degree of normalization of seeking help during the pandemic. And so now I think the question, so the question is now, how do we control those costs? So I'll just pause there.
How do we control the costs?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of like alternative payment models or whatever can we start pressing in? Because it's not like that's going to get better, like over the next 5 or 10 years. I think we're trying to sustain that that increase in access, increase in accessing those services, not to mention the longer lasting effects of the pandemic. Yeah. So with that, just knowing that, and knowing that we are contained inside of a 3.4%, we can't, at this point, we can't go to the legislature and be like, we actually want to increase in, costs related to behavioral health. There was also, our conversation about increasing reimbursement rates potentially. Yeah. So with all of that, not to sort out right now, but just some preliminary thoughts of like, what does it look like to meet those goals? Mm-hmm. And also do it in a way to contain costs, and that probably has something to do with alternative payment models and getting creative around management and payment and so on, and telehealth, etc. But I just want to plant that seed for the moment. Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's a very good question. I don't know, maybe where I'm worried, I'm just wondering, because we take a look at the per member per year cost for like anxiety and depression. We are getting, those have gone down in 21, but the number of members who have been seeking those services, or patients, has gone up. So I'm not sure we're necessarily at the right place in terms of the treatment patterns and number of services, and making sure the members are getting treated to the level that they need to be quite yet. I think that's worth exploring. So there may be some additional costs there, but in terms of innovative ways of behavioral health treatments, I mean, we can definitely talk about it. I think this is a great idea, great area to, we've been kind of looking at for the IWG. I think we can try to come up with ideas for a potential retreat, or, later on to come up with some thoughts and then discussion points and ways to, address that issue as over the next few years.
I would just add, we're going to have the carriers come in and brief the board on their member advocacy programs around behavioral health and how that will help manage access and hopefully costs and result in better outcomes for our members.
Yeah, and actually, is it the next slide? Let's see, can we move on one slide? No, it's not a slide, but that's okay. There's also a slide on telehealth behavioral health telehealth, and members are still utilizing it as much as they had at the beginning of the pandemic. And so, maybe a additional vendor solution there might help short term, and the cost.
Some future topics anyway. Yeah. The second thing, if we want to go back one slide, the second thing I just wanted to highlight was around diabetes. So for some of our newer board members, just before the pandemic hit, we were pretty deep into a special project related to Worksite wellness, specifically focused around pre-diabetes and diabetes self-management. And then the pandemic hit, and that kind of went by the wayside. But I think we're at a position now, like this is a major issue. We're only really detecting right now, just the way the data works, is like people seeking care, So what we were looking at before the pandemic was like there's this group of people, of course, that have diabetes in our population, of which there are too many, of which are too expensive. So there's all kinds of things to work on there. Also, there's a group of pre-diabetics who are in danger of moving into becoming diabetic. And once you make that move, it's well, biologically, it's like really difficult to go back, right? So once you're, kind of diabetic, you're always managing it. Whereas if you're pre-diabetic, you can actually back it off and delay the onset for many years. So given the nationwide numbers, which we presume are also correct here in Oregon, there was a general weight increase in Americans on average in the pandemic, somewhere around 10 pounds perhaps on average. That amount of poundage is the amount just about that one would convert from pre-diabetic to diabetic. So it's like kind of this narrow range. So I think we should probably presume that there is like this increase of folks that were pre-diabetic just before the pandemic who are now diabetic. And now there's a new crop of people who are now pre-diabetic, right? And so everything about that is not good, right? So we want to be sure that people that have become diabetic are now being like well managed, and we're not getting gouged on pharmaceutical prices and whatever. And we want to try to back off the number of people that are becoming diabetic. And all of the pandemic happenings are working against us in that. So I'm just highlighting it for the board. It was like, that is something theoretically we can work on and have before, and there's vendor solutions and various other communication. And we just heard about Worksite wellness stuff in the first half of the meeting. So all this starts to come together here on this slide, because it's like, it's real expensive. And it's life-changing for these people, I mean, once you're diabetic, it's a thing. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that it's probably going to be worse than this, than it's on that it's already shown up. And we want to try to like crank that down using all the tools that we can related to Worksite wellness and various other means, just to get those, everyone moving back down the scale as far as self-management.
Actually, before we move on, I guess I just wanted to get a time check. How much time do I have left?
So we have you scheduled until 12:20.
Okay, so not much. Okay. Yeah, so I guess just moving on, we might skip some sections of this, but wanted to talk about preventive screening rates. So screenings have increased. So this is kind of a little bit in reverse order of some of the other slides. So the blue is 2019, and then the purple is 2021. So for preventive visits on the left-hand side for employees, you can see a big drop in the 2020 in the green, and it's come back a bit in 2021, but it's still below the 32%. So that's something to address. And, we've talked about it, but it's still below and might be related to some of the other, hypertension, other things on the prior slide. And same with the preventive visits for the spouse. The number of visits, a percentage of members who have a visit is still below where they are and below what we have for our book of business for Mercer. So definitely, I think similar story. So just trying to get people in and have those services and make sure they're identified, pre-diabetes, diabetes, or, other conditions before they get really expensive and acute. In terms of the screening rates, those still also remain a little bit more of a mixed story, a little below for cervical cancer and cholesterol, which are the 4th and 5th columns. And then mammogram is back, not quite at the 53% it was pre-pandemic, but it's above our book of business. And then colon cancer screening rates, similar story. It's not quite at pre-pandemic, but it's back up and it's above our book of business. So still need preventive services, make sure people get their screenings, try to avoid the conditions or identify those conditions from the prior slide.
Emery, in this data on the prevention visits, does this include behavioral health and addiction and alcohol screenings inside of those screenings?
Well, those are best practices, right, in terms of asking questions. So I imagine they would be. I think there's actually, I don't know for sure off the top of my head if that's part of the performance guarantee. If you ask that screening, I think it is, but we'll have to check. So I guess, yes, to your point, in terms of trying to get that question initial screening, it probably is as part of the preventive screenings. Moving on to the next slide. So this is a slide on the telehealth visits. So the green is medical telehealth. The blue is the behavioral health telehealth visits. And that's behavioral health and substance abuse. And so you can see for the blue, at least for Kaiser HMO, there's a significant number of both, and Kaiser deductible as well. The behavioral health telehealth visits jumped up during COVID and remain high. The medical services have kind of dropped down a bit. And if we moved on to the next slide, a little bit more stark picture, I guess, for this self-insured plans, MODA, Providence, and statewide. So behavioral health telehealth remains really high. So I think, in terms of one of the things in way people access services during the pandemic, that stuck around, mental health services via telehealth. And so anything, people are using it. I guess people have found it useful. And any way that you can do to increase, I guess, potentially look at vendors, increase usage of mental health telehealth. I mean, it's something that I think has stuck around and it would be very useful for PEB members. Okay. Moving on. And then emergency room visits, those remain low. Lower, although they have come back quite a bit. They have come back a bit, 9% compared to the really low 2020 time period. The percentage of non-emergent based on NYU classifications has been, it's 18% in the current period. So people, I think, have used emergency rooms, I guess, more judiciously than they have in the past, but they are using it more than they have in the past. So kind of pretty decent news, although the number of visits has gone up. Next slide. Okay, so I'll just go through, in the interest of time, the next slide, which I don't know if it's a lot of similar stories to what we had talked about in the past. So utilization for inpatient facility has gone down. Kaiser deductible did have an increase. Maternity services costs have made the overall cost below. For outpatient office visits or behavioral health services, increased utilization. I think we talked about the emergency room there, and lab and radiology where services are coming back, and COVID-19 has had a huge impact on lab. And then, on the prescription drugs, it's cost increase, specialty drugs outside of PBMs has gone down. So mixed story on the specialty drugs. But additional details actually on the next few slides. I don't think I want to go through that, but if we move to, I think 6 slides or some slides later, where we talk about next steps.
And Emery,
Yes.
just on time, so that the board has time to ask questions after you finish, we'll take your presentation until 12:30 and then adjust some of the remaining agenda items.
Okay. All right, thanks. So just kind of, I guess, the themes, the stories, and where, potential action items, strategic directions for the PEB board. Mental health, we've talked a lot about this. This is huge. Access online, in the screenings, making sure people are getting their screenings as they go into the doctor and the preventive visits, and burnout and things like that. So much bigger topic, something that we can discuss in especially in terms of cost management. It's more than what I think we can talk for a utilization report, but it's something very important. Diabetes, top spend category overall increasing in prevalence. Insulin, I think mentioned earlier, insulin costs continue to increase. So I don't know what we can do about that, but it's something to monitor, ask the plans about to see what they can do to make sure the cost of insulin is capped. It's not really an issue for PEB members because I think it's a free, right? No cost sharing for insulin. But it is a PEB cost. And so every dollar that the insulin costs increase, it goes directly to PEB. Musculoskeletal and low back disorders. We're working on developing a COE, talking about potentially what can be used to incent usage of that and to improve outcomes, get them to the higher performing providers and facilities and better outcomes in screening out people for our low prior to getting surgeries or getting lower impact, more physical therapy and just trying to reduce the overall cost and not have them do surgeries if possible. So it's a big issue in terms of PEB. And so that's something we're working on. And then specialty drugs. So that's a topic we will take for the October meeting, try to get more information about that. PEB has been steering people, implementing site of care steered programs. So, that's providing some savings and just continuing to monitor those and add when appropriate. And then rising costs, inflation, issues with facilities and staffing and cost of that, trend impacts. It's a huge theme that's been going on in terms of trend, issues with staffing and cost. The St. Charles system here, where I live in the Bend, Central Oregon area, has been in the news about their issues. I think other hospitals have been potentially talking about losing money, and that as a result, while some of them are capped at 200% Medicare, there's going to be other areas where they may want to, I guess, make up the losses. And so that's going to have impacts on trend. And what can PEB do, especially in terms of the 3.4% limitation? So, talking about which providers which plans may be the most efficient, best contracting, especially Eastern Oregon, increasing advocacy, try to steer members to lower cost, higher efficiency providers, anything that can be done to, outside of just done to mitigate that 3.4% cost, value-based payments and other things like that. So big topic for that's, I guess, to come and be great to discuss. But so with that, are there any questions from the PEB board?
I just wanted to ask just on that last point, the discussion the Innovations Work Group has been having around Centers for Excellence, just thinking about where are we with that conversation? Is that something we are going to be looking at in 2023 around, if we're bringing folks in from other parts of the state, will that help reduce costs? So just curious about that.
And Margaret, would you like to take that topic?
well, gosh, we're jumping ahead to the innovation work group update, which is on the agenda for just a few minutes from now. But I can tell you, Siobhan, so one of the things that the innovation work group is continuing to work on this summer while public meetings are on hiatus is the Centers of Excellence project. So we're continuing to work with all three carriers on how to structure a proposed COE program. And in terms of the project timeline, there's still a number of technicalities and specifics we're working through right now, but we are on track to have sort of a proposed approach with some options for the boards, both the OEB and PEB boards, to consider by fall, early fall. So we're looking at the September-October timeframe to have more information to share on that.
Great, thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the PEB board? Comments?
No, just thank you for all that you put together. It's always wonderful to see. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I would just offer, to board members, if there's, I know this is a ton of information, a lot of great information, and if you are interested, I'd be happy to meet one-on-one and go through any questions or, a lot of very complex information. Just let me know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we, Ali, let's talk about, the various avenues for analysis that, Don and Sean and others have brought up as well. So we can do that. Well, thank you for your time. I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
All right, thank you so much, Emery. And Ollie, I know we're going to do a little juggling of the last two items because Jeremy's not here to give us a global budget pilot report update. Did you want to share anything around that, Ollie?
Yeah, I can provide the update. It's really fairly brief. We actually sent out the report to the legislature about 2 weeks ago and sent it out to all the board members. This is House Bill 2010, which is from the 21 session, and where OHA was required to provide recommendations for a global budget healthcare delivery pilot in Oregon. The proposed model described in the report, and I would suggest just reading the exec summary will give you a pretty good idea of where things are at and what the report is about. But this establishes an annual predetermined total budget for a defined population in global budget. That's another term to describe that. It allows flexibility for exactly how health services are reimbursed under that budget. The report includes information and recommendations related to what it would take to implement a pilot, like estimated timeframe, regulatory considerations, potential populations, and further pilot development steps. Also, what should be considered when selecting a pilot region, including minimum population size, health equity considerations, payer provider community interest, and of course, purchaser and payer mix, among many other things. Also, what requirements should pilot participants be held accountable to? The community engagement efforts, requirements related to addressing social determinants of health and health equity, requirements related to our value-based payment advancement as well. And then how should potential costs and savings be considered in a pilot? Pursuing a pilot will require support for engagement efforts, technical resources to operate and evaluate the pilot, and further consideration of potential incentives for pilot participation. So in addition to the Oregon Health Authority recommendations, the full report includes technical analyses from consultants that OHA engaged to support this work, and also OHA's Health Equity Impact Assessment Summary and engagement recommendations. So as far as next steps, it's really to be determined based on this next legislative session and how the legislature decides to proceed based on the information provided in this report. Again, if you have any questions related to the House Bill 2010 report, please feel free to reach out. And in the meantime, we'll keep you updated. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Ollie. And are we going to go ahead and move to you, Margaret, for the Innovation Workgroup update? I know Sean's listed here as well, so I don't know which of you is planning to give the update.
Well, I can get started, and Sean, certainly feel free to chime in if there's anything you want to add. So I'll just kind of share just a real quick few-minute update on the Innovation Workgroup. I think as previously mentioned, the workgroup is taking a brief hiatus from public meetings over the summer. So there are no public meetings for the workgroup in July and August. The workgroup will reconvene in public session the third Tuesday in September. But despite that hiatus, there is quite a bit of work in progress continuing over the summer. One body of work that was already referenced is related to the development of a proposed Centers of Excellence program for both PEB and OEB. This would be a Centers of Excellence program for hip and knee surgeries specifically. And as noted, the work is moving along and is on track to have options and recommendations for board consideration this fall. Additionally, another body of work that's in progress is what was also mentioned a little bit earlier in the meeting today, the hospital cap savings analysis. We are doing some work to have that analysis updated specifically with 2021 claims to look at savings recognized under that payment cap. That also will be ready this fall, and the work group will review it, and it will also be shared with the boards when the information is ready. Other major topics on the work plan for the Innovation Work Group for the second half of this calendar year include continued look at value-based payments. We did some initial look at data out of APAC in terms of value-based payment levels, and specifically looking at progress toward the targets that are established in the value-based payment compact, to which both OEB, PEB, and all of our carriers are signatories. We are looking at some little nuances to the data and expecting more data from the carriers that will be reported per requirements in our contracts in September. And so we will be spending some time this fall further examining kind of progress on value-based payments, and also hearing from the Compact's value-based payment work group with regard to their roadmap and anticipation of recommendations and approaches for how to further value-based payment adoption. And then a final, well, and I shouldn't say final body of work, but another major body of work on the Innovation Work Group's work plan for this fall is around price transparency. Our carriers, per our contracts, will be submitting price transparency files to PEB and OEB in September, consistent with federal price transparency reporting requirements that took effect for health plans this summer. And upon receipt of that data, we are anticipating that we'll be doing some pretty extensive analyses looking at price across various categories of services and price relative to benchmarks and sort of other indicators out there. So currently this summer, we're working on a kind of more formal analysis plan of what that work will look like. And that will also be forthcoming in the latter half of this year. So those are sort of the main bodies of work currently in the queue for the Innovation Work Group going on in sort of various subgroups. I think, as previously noted, we certainly heard some great input from the board today as well in terms of other specific areas around utilization, cost, and outcomes that we will be factoring into the analyses we have planned, as well as further development of the work group's work plan for the coming months. Are there any questions? Or Sean, if you have anything you'd like to add? Yeah, Andrea, go ahead.
Can I, since I'm new, can you explain what the Centers of Excellence is?
Yeah, so the whole concept behind a centers of excellence is that at a really high level, that you have sort of an identified procedure or service, and you, through data analyses, specifically looking at quality and outcomes, which is the sort of the primary filter we're really applying in terms of identifying who potential providers would be. You identify the top quality providers for a given service. Typically, those are providers. There is an association between volume and quality. So typically, they're providers who have a lot of experience providing that service. And then you, there's different ways to structure a program. You know, if in theory, it could be mandatory, where you say, okay, all individuals who receive this service are going, you know, to receive it from these providers in order to have the service covered. There's approaches that are voluntary or incentivized, where you might say, we want to encourage folks to go to these particular providers. And so here's how we're going to do that, to sort of provide an incentive for them to be seeking the care where we know the outcomes are best. And then along with that outcomes approach, you generally would expect to also negotiate favorable cost. So in a nutshell, that's at a high level, lots of nuance and technicalities within to be figured out. And Sean,
that was what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the just for a little history there, that I believe it was at this board, but you know, the OEB board too, a couple of years ago, we were looking at some data, and we were looking at, you know, a few procedure, you saw it today, I think the code word is like musculoskeletal, you know, something. And which basically is like, you know, knees, hips, and back surgery, right? And so what we found was we did kind of a regional analysis, and we found that as happens in healthcare, more than we would like, price and quality were not related. So there were quite a few places in the state that were the most expensive and also the worst as far as outcomes. And then there were some places that were really good on outcomes, and they were one of the cheapest. And so we were like, how do we get everyone to go there? And so the formal, centers of excellence is basically like a way to formalize. And at that point, we were even thinking like, gosh, you know, I'd rather pay someone to drive to the place that is farther away, where one, they're going to get a better outcome anyway. Like, they're going to have a better surgery. And two, it's going to cost us like half as much. But as Margaret said, when you actually get to like really designing it, then there's all these little decisions about like what exactly is the threshold and how do you define, you know, and then like, are you gonna, do you require people to go and you just cover the travel costs for them, or do you give them an option but you make it more expensive? You're like, there's all these like decisions. That's taken some time, like longer than I thought. And so we've really been digesting like how exactly do you define good? You know, like what does that mean, using what data? And then how, you know, and then other plan design changes and such. So that's really what we've been chewing on. And so it's still got some time to bake in the oven, so to speak, over the summer to try to get to some really specific suggestion that both the OEB board and the PEB board could agree to at the same time. So that's kind of the trick. So we'll see.
Right. Well, thank you, Margaret and Sean. And Ali, on the agenda, it says there was an updated work plan that was going to be provided to the board as a handout. So I don't know if that is just something that should be emailed out to folks, if that's our work plan, or whether that was a mistake that showed up on the agenda.
Yeah, no, that if it wasn't part of the attachment, we will email it out.
Okay. I missed it on my attachment, but maybe I just didn't see it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought I attached it. I'll send it out right away.
No worries. Thank
And
you.
I don't know if there was anything you wanted to say around that attachment.
Not really. I talked about it a little bit today. We'll take a real in-depth look at kind of the COVID landscape next month. Pharmaceuticals in October, and we're looking at a retreat in November. we'll get some more details out to the board around that probably in the next month or two.
Great, thank you, Ollie. And Rose, do we have any public comment today?
No, no public comment.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining today, and we will adjourn at 12:39.
Thank you.
Bye.